Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life. This is Freshly Pressed. We have the analysts in, and we're looking at the news stories making the headlines across the country. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please share your thoughts with us. The WhatsApp number is 0809 4440981. You can also tweet at Smooth981. We're also streaming live on our YouTube channel. It's Smooth981. So you can catch the live stream, and you can also post a comment on there. The analysts are in this morning. It's Mr. C and AB Bozimo. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Great to be here. Have a wonderful week ahead. Good morning, Mr. C. Good morning to all of the wonderful listeners out there.
Good morning, Zibby. Good morning, AB. Good morning, Lagos.
All right, let's start off with the first headline coming from Vanguard. Peton members, others consider bidding for Nigeria's oil blocks. Peton is the Petroleum Technology Association of Nigeria. Maybe?
You know, all these stories where we intend to, they consider, they plan to, they have it in view. Are you going to bid or aren't you? This is basically a story about what's going on at the OTC conference in Houston, where very highly placed members of Nigeria's government and oil sector went, the Minister of State of Petroleum, the head of the NNPC and all that. Go read the story yourself. It's a junket, fantastic. I hope they make it there and back. Here's the thing. I was curious or intrigued at the numbers. They said that the assets in Nigeria to date have produced the following: 5.35 billion barrels of crude oil. What's on the market now is about 4.9 billion barrels. So as it stands, Nigeria has already utilized over 50% of the proven assets. But what was more interesting to me is that over time, we have produced about 165 million with an M of condensate, and there are over 1.77 billion barrels of condensate left to exploit. And then, most intriguingly, we have done 9.51 trillion cubic feet of associated gas and 3.7 trillion cubic feet of non-associated gas. But what do we have left? 28.1 trillion cubic feet of both associated and non-associated gas. So on a good day, this gives truth to the statement that Nigeria is an oil-producing nation with a touch of petroleum. If you think of how much of a mess Nigeria over 64 years, or even 66, I think we discovered oil in 2 years before independence, how much of a mess Nigeria has made with the oil that we have used over halfway, and you consider it side by side with what we have left in terms of gas, there is an opportunity to turn Nigerians' fortunes around. I looked at the mix of our energy. Nigerians, we have hydro, we have a few sustainable, which we have to build up, but majority of our energy production is in gas. With the amount of gas reserves we have in Nigeria, there is every possibility, every practicality that Nigeria could actually have guaranteed power in the next X time. That X would be totally dependent on the commitment and the ability and capacity of those in leadership positions to convert that resource for our own good. It is inconceivable that up till now, we don't have reliable power. We have so much gas reserves. So the question becomes, what are the managers of Nigeria's economy actually doing? What are they measuring themselves against? I don't think these projects can come up at the snap of a finger. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that imagine you have that in your quote unquote bank. You should be calm, you should be concerted, and you should concentrate on bringing those benefits to your nation. There are some policies that the current administration is rolling out in terms of allowing power to be generated at the subnational level and trying to open the markets out. I just think those numbers were really intriguing, and with proper management, the turnaround can occur. But as I said, this story is fundamentally that people went to OTC, they're hawking Nigeria's hydrocarbon industries to the world. Let's not forget there's an energy transition taking place. So to an extent, the crude oil and all that may soon, well, let me say soon, may eventually be less favored in the world. But I think the thing to do is do what Philips did with the light bulb. They had a chance to hide the development of the incandescent bulb, but instead they went out ahead. Nigeria should become a hub, a heartland, in fact, an expert in everything to do with hydrocarbon industry. We can't keep being spectators watching IOCs exploit the thing, tell us what they have produced. We may or may not have corroboration. And then there was a time during the former administration where a ship would leave Nigeria with 50,000 barrels of oil, sail straight to the Europe and offload 60,000 barrels of oil. And then President Buhari said, look, use a spreadsheet. Whatever that difference is what you're owing Nigeria. But nothing much ever came of it. I'm just saying we have an opportunity with proper management to turn our fortunes around, especially when it comes to power, which is an engine of manufacturing, as Mr. C will go further to talk about.
All right, let's move on to the next headline. And this one comes from The Guardian. Tinubu assures of more policies for industrialization. Mr. C?
Okay, so thank you. Thank you very much. On Friday, the chief of staff to the president, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, was meeting with representatives of the automotive associations for Nigeria and Africa, and they were led by the Minister for Industry, Trade and Investments, Ms. Doris Uzoka-Nite. And he was assuring them that his administration would continue to put in place policies for the industrialization of the country. And he urged them to ensure that within the shortest time possible, they start the local manufacturing of vehicles in country. Now, this is all well and good, but there are a couple of challenges to this noble intention. One is Ajaokuta Steel Complex. 40 of the 42 plants have been completed, but the complex as a whole remains idle. So when you urge automotive manufacturers to begin domestic manufacturing, where are they supposed to get the steels they need for the cars from? They would have to import again. And with importation, you are subject to the fluidity of the dollar versus naira contest. Also, you're subject to duty appreciations between the time you open the Form M and the time you need to get the money out. Now, more importantly, power is a major requirement for automotive manufacturing. As AB said in the first story, we still haven't sorted out power 63 years after independence, which is truly tragic. So it's one thing to tell them, we would love to see you guys start manufacturing. But the truth of the matter remains. You don't produce steel in country in the quantity sufficient to ensure you can manufacture cars here. What is going on here is we're assembling cars in Nigeria. No plant in Nigeria is manufacturing any car because they don't have the amount of steel required. So they bring down completely knocked down parts, they put them together here. So until we sort out steel manufacturing in Nigeria to the quantum required for automotive manufacturing, and we sort out the conundrum that, and the paradox power has been in Nigeria, this is never going to take off. And then more importantly, this is also a part of the story. The president sent in the chief of staff to meet these guys. Now, the vice president only left the country on Sunday evening. He's off to the States for a business and political summit. Why wasn't the vice president asked to meet these guys? Is there a crack in the presidency? Because I'm surprised that they will jump the vice president and land at the chief of staff. But anyways, early days. But more importantly, this is another one of those policy declarations and intentions by the administration. They have not yet shown very concrete plans on how they intend to solve the power conundrum. Simply raising the tariff for a band is not the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is getting the investors in. And if you increase the tariff prices, but you don't increase the supply, then it makes nonsense of your decision to try to put in cost-effective tariffs, because if the supply is not there, you are statutorily and legally bound to move them down to the next feeder. And when those lowest feeders are not cost reflective, then the proposed and the desired investment will never get into the power sector. So the administration needs to buckle down and work on the solutions. And it's interesting that an assessment is being done for them. And it will also be very interesting to see how many of them scale that assessment. But it's early days. For now, I don't see any manufacturing until the two major issues I've identified have been adequately resolved.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. C. Let's look at some of the messages coming through. Don't forget, you can send them through via WhatsApp 0809 440 981. And you can also tweet at smooth981. Tonye says, define irony. The country is facing a crippling fuel crisis, and top government officials are on a jamboree in Houston at OTC 2024. Laughable, ain't it? All right. We're moving on to Daily Trust. Federal government to stop funding non-performing varsity centers of excellence. AB?
Yes, the federal government is rattling the saber with the threats not, of no more funding. There were about 12 centers set up in various parts of the country, Abuja, Jos, Bauchi, and all that. And they're supposed so I wanted to know, what does non-performing mean? Because you have a threat to stop funding for non-performance. What does performance look like, and what's the contrary? So what are these centers? One is on public governance and leadership. Another is on food security. About two on food security, arid zone research and development. We have agricultural engineering and translational studies. We have renewable energy, urology and nephrology, biodiversity conservation and ecosystem management, multidisciplinary studies, computational intelligence, aquaculture, and food technology. Look around this country. In which of those areas I just highlighted is there any notable performance? A center of excellence is an opportunity. That's what it is. It's an opportunity for focused research and development to be done in a certain sphere. And that's a very noble, in fact, it's an excellent concept. But I'm seeing these things and I'm asking myself how the places or the people there are actually able to tackle these areas. Computational intelligence. Do we have lights? Can you compute without lights? Agricultural research. Do we have security? Can you experiment and all that? And I know you can do, laboratories, seedlings and all that, but to send it out into the wild and see what the result is there security? So as much as you want to threaten to close them down, and it's important to put people on their toes, but you too, who is the threatener, have to provide the environment where they can best thrive. I'm not making excuses for centers of excellence. They have a mandate and they have a lot of money. In fact, in some cases, ₦1 billion each, okay? So they can buy generators, or better still, they can invest in renewable energy so that they're not always paying for refueling. So they don't have excuses. But what I'm saying is that the centers of excellence function within a larger society, and the vagaries of the society are important to address side by side with the threats. That said, these are areas that can definitely benefit the country. Food security, arid zone research and development, somewhere like the famous Sambisa forest should be a hotbed of investigations, innovations, and discoveries. Renewable energy, it's set up in Kano, where the sun never stops shining. So we want to hear that more renewable energy ideas and sources and even manufacturing begin to result from that. Because honestly, what has made some other parts of the world function is that they do research and they convert it into products, manufacturing, marketing, and all that. Remember, there's a value chain for any product. It's not just the manufacturing, it's the marketing, it's the maintenance, and of course, the uses that you can get out of it. So a center of excellence should be seen as one piece of a value chain that can add to the productivity and GDP of Nigeria. They can threaten like that, that's their right. They set up the centers, but they should also create conditions around them that can help them. But indeed, they have been decently funded. Let's ask questions. What are the results coming out of there? And let's do better when we can.
All right, thank you, Amy, for that. You're still listening to Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1. Stay with us. The conversation continues shortly. It's Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1. Would love to get your thoughts and your opinions on the headlines that we're discussing. WhatsApp number is 0809 4440981. You can also tweet at Smooth981. We're streaming live as well, so you can catch that live stream. It's Smooth981 on YouTube. Let's see. Cisco Delgado says all automobile industries in Nigeria, like blank, 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 assemble cars and not manufacturing. Well, for Nigeria to start manufacturing cars, the basic things that should be in place are steady electricity and the steel mills to work. Tonye says, define irony again, a center for renewable energy running on diesel generators. Cisco Delgado says our leaders should stop the lip service of doing things and get to work. I always say what Nigeria needs at the moment is action, not meetings upon meetings. Nigerians can do well if given the opportunity. Okay, and moving on to the next story. This one is coming from Punch. Tinubu to get ministers Q1 assessment reports, Mr. C.
Okay, thank you, Zibby. So the president is expected to receive the assessments for his ministers for Q1 2024 when the outstanding 15 ministries submit their responses to the questionnaires issued to them. Now, 20 of them have done that. Remember that his cabinet is one of the largest seen in recent times in Nigeria. It's about 50, it's a 50-man strong cabinet. Now, it's instructive to know that from the story, it has been strongly suggested by presidency sources that they will be assessed solely on Q1 performance. Now, I find that a little bit strange because why are they not being also assessed on Q4 2023? Let's rule out Q3 2023 because they had to be nominated, they had to go through the Senate screening, they had to come to terms with the mandates or the roles or responsibilities given to them. So why are you not judging them over a 6-month period? Now, the process they've employed to get these assessments out is the ministries first respond. Then there's a citizen tracker app that was launched by the presidency, I think sometime last year. And citizens are supposed to log into the app, register, and then give their honest, real-time analysis of what the ministers are supposed to have done. Then on the basis of that, there's an aggregation or collation of all the facts and information. Then an assessment score is issued. Now, I think it's crystal clear to most Nigerians that a majority of this 50-man cabinet has sorely underperformed. Because when you look at it critically, there's very little for this current administration to boast of after nearly a year in office. When you take all the critical sectors from the economy to security, to food security, to agriculture, to employment, to tourism, it's literally a series or litany of underperformance or zero performance, as the case may be. Now, the truth of the matter is he needs to rejig his cabinet, because if this is the cabinet he's relying on to deliver his renewed hope agenda, then it's safe to say that based on current performance, it's going to be a tall order. It's going to be a miracle for them to deliver anything close to what has been promised or what has been suggested. Now, we don't know when exactly the assessment will be submitted to him. Incidentally, he's not in the country. The vice president is not in the country. So it's all a matter of time before we know where we are with the current cabinet. But it will be in his best interest politically to ensure that he removes all the dead roots from his cabinet and he brings in people who are ready and able to hit the ground running. Because remember, before he got sworn in, he did promise Nigerians that he will hit the ground running. 1 year after, I'm not sure that is a reality shared by a lot of Nigerians, especially with regards to his cabinet. So he holds all the strings, and he's the only one that can decide if they go and when they go.
All right, and next headline comes from Vanguard. Tinubu's aide calls for increased care for senior citizens in Nigeria.
Yes, the senior special assistant to the president on SDGs, Princess Adejoke Orelope Adefulire, hope got the name halfway right, calls for considerable attention to the welfare and development of senior citizens across the country. You see, the measure of the quality of the society is how we treat the quote-unquote least among us. The arc of a life starts from birth, toddler, child, youth, adults, many working years, hopefully, and then the onset of age. And sometimes it's very easy to ignore the value in the aged among us. What happens sometimes is they become set aside, they become lonely, they are not paid as much attention as they ought. Sure, they have left their more overtly productive years, but their experience is a lot that can, assist the society. And yes, in foreign countries, for instance, some of the Western countries, they have old people's homes. Culturally, we don't tend to send culturally, thus far, we don't tend to send elderly people away from us. But there should be a balance where at least they're able to engage with others, maybe of similar vintage and all that, and have the opportunity to interact. Too often in our societies, senior citizens are just set aside, they become lonely, the quality of their life reduces. So we're just saying that in this story, that there must be more attention to their health care, because as age comes, so do challenges in their health. Social inclusion, don't isolate them. Then economic support. Some people have medication that costs so much, and over the course of their life, they may not have in fact, the costs keep going up. So even if they were able to afford it 1, 2, 3 months or years ago, it becomes increasingly expensive. Think of what is happening to many people now with a huge jump in inflation. Food costs, some of them still have dependents. And so it's just important, again, when we're talking about NIM, BVN, capture these people, capture the demographic, and provide for them. That is what a sensible society does. And never forget, as the good Lord permits, we shall all get old. So never think it's so far away. It's around the corner if, the Almighty permits us to reach there. I think it's a very important, and then there's one thing that happens, elder abuse. It happens too. And these are things where you need to have justice for people who are being abused in some of those cases. So I'm just saying it's one of those stories that it takes some sitting down to assess what is the point of the story. But the point is very real. You need increased care on all dimensions for senior citizens in Nigeria, because that is one further measure of the quality of the society in which we live.
All right, let's look at some messages coming through. Gilbert says, on automotive manufacturing in Nigeria, let's cast our minds back to March 1975 when Peugeot and Volkswagen assembly plants were commissioned in Kaduna and Lagos, respectively. They functioned for a while before operations ceased in the late 1980s. Have we investigated the reason for their failures? And another message coming from Ajayi. Ajayi says the performance of most of the ministers is terribly poor, especially the Minister of Power, Blue Economy, Agriculture, etc. The president should remove them now. And Anthony Francis says, I strongly believe there's a very big conspiracy in the power sector in this country because I don't understand how it'll be working even in poor African countries but can't get fixed here after decades and billions of dollar investments. Some people are definitely cashing out big in the darkness. The talk about renewable energy seems strange to our leaders. They love this power grid, in quote, thing that they can switch on and off at will to remain in control. Fabian from Ekber says the government has to first revamp the health sector and then they can put things in place to foster geriatric care, which is presently abysmal at best. Many retirees have collapsed and died while waiting for their pensions. And next headline comes from Vanguard. FG states to review sentencing for suicide attempts, and this is according to Fabemi Sen.
Thank you, Zibby. So lately, the issue of mental health has been on the increase and more attention is being paid to it. Before now, we hadn't really, as a nation, paid a lot of attention to mental health. And this has resulted in an increasing number of suicide attempts and an increasing number of suicides were successful. Now, it must be pointed out that the penalty for attempting suicide in Nigeria is a year's imprisonment. Now, these laws were established or passed in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. So there was a prevailing mindset at that point in time. But over the years, we've seen a shift in that mindset. Now, in the 40s down to the 60s, mental health wasn't so much an issue, but now more attention is being paid to it. And with the way Nigeria currently is, I dare say that a lot of Nigerians, or some, yes, I dare say a lot of Nigerians are going through some form of trauma or the other, whether it's from being raised as children to the general trauma everyone is going through today as a result of the increasing cost of living, or even just trying to exist in the parody or the paradox that is Nigeria. And the truth of the matter is, I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that we have the right quantity of doctors or psychologists or therapists who can attend to this emerging sector, subsector of healthcare. Now, instructively, it's traditionally not a cheap subsector. So the question then comes in Nigeria needs to receive some sort of therapy with regards to mental health. How does he pay for it? How does he afford it? Thankfully, there are a number of health medical organizations that provide healthcare packages. But the question is mental health counseling and treatment part of the services they offer? It's all up in the air. Maybe they do, maybe some do, maybe some don't. Now, the AGF was speaking, and he said that it's one thing to change the law at the federal level, but he has to get on board the various state attorney generals of the subnational governments to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Now, whilst the legal part is going on, we have to also educate the people from the cultural perspective, because suicide is still frowned upon, is still looked upon as in a negative light. And for people who attempt to commit suicide and are not successful, there is a stigma that is then attached to them that probably never leaves them. And it could affect generations long after they departed the earth. So yes, the Attorney General of the Federation is on the right track, but it's going to take deliberate, intentional, and continuous education and re-education, in addition to amending the laws, for us to get to the point where people who have mental health challenges do not feel ashamed to speak up and acknowledge that they're dealing with deficiencies with their mental health, and also are confident and courageous enough to seek help without being stigmatized for it.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. C. Let's look at a few more messages coming through. And Degboyega Dedeji says the president himself as Minister of Petroleum has not performed well. So who will assess him and what do we expect from other ministries when he has not done so well? And this one is from Phillips. Phillips says if retired civil servants had done the right thing and stopped corruption, they would have been enjoying it now. You can't eat your cake and still have it. Tonye says, why are we overly concerned about vehicle assembly in Nigeria? I thought a certain minister promised that Nigeria would start manufacturing airplanes by the end of last year. Let's look into that instead. And Don Kelvin says, it's amusing that the president and vice are not in the country after placing a ban on international travel for 3 months. Is it already 3 months? Wasting taxpayers' money junked across the world with nothing to show for it. Well, that is all the time that we have for Freshly Pressed this morning. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your messages. And of course, special thanks to our analysts, AB and Mr. C, for being on the show this morning.
Thank you. Always have a great week ahead. Agree with me, disagree with me, hit me up at AB Bozimo on all platforms. Have a wonderful week ahead.
Thank you for having me and have a lovely and fruitful week ahead. Bye, Lagos.
Thank you. Do stay with us. There is a lot more to come on the Smooth Breakfast.